Hey there, welcome back to Family Shadows, where we tell quiet stories about fathers who love hard, carry long, and choose dignity when words are not enough. If you're new here, settle in. And if this kind of story speaks to you, consider subscribing and turning on the little bell, so these gentle truths find you right when you need them. Tonight's story is called, "My Daughter Chose Her Husband's Birthday Over Her Mother's Funeral. Now She's Back with a Shocking Demand." I dressed slowly that morning like a man putting on someone else's skin. The suit was the one Sarah liked because it made my shoulders look sturdy, as if she were describing a good porch beam. She had a way with hands and houses, small ways of seeing what holds things together. It made sense. She was a nurse for 3 decades, and if a home is a body made of wood and laughter, she kept ours breathing through 100 small kindnesses. The Pacific Northwest sky did its usual gray performance, a soft drizzle that felt respectful, like the weather had remembered its hat. I stood by the bedroom window and watched a pair of crows argue across the yard. The hydrangeas had given up their big summer blues and settled into a bruised October. I noticed because Sarah always noticed. "The blues will come back," she'd say. "They always do, Jack. They just rest in another color for a while." On the dresser sat her jewelry box, the one with the tiny brass lock that never worked. I opened it because I needed to hear the small wooden hinges complain. They had a sound like an old friend clearing his throat before speaking. Her wedding band lay inside, thin from all the years it served as a promise. Beneath it, tucked under a folded handkerchief that still carried a breath of lavender, was an envelope with Emily written in Sarah's tidy nurse's cursive. I held it like a small, breakable bird. The seal wasn't broken. I thought about reading it, then didn't. There are some doors you don't open when you're already standing at the edge of a cliff. I slipped the envelope back into the box and slid my ring finger over my own band. It had made a faint groove in my hand over 40 years. My finger looked naked without it, so I didn't take it off, not even for the service. A man needs some weight to keep him from floating off. The church smelled like lilies, and wood, polish, and coffee from the basement urn. Reverend Lewis had put a glass of water at the pulpit and a box of tissues on the first pew, the way he always did when loss sat heavy on the room. The ushers, farmers in their Sunday jackets, murmured with the women from the casserole brigade. I nodded at them at the way grief organizes a town. On the front right pew, they'd tied a sprig of baby's breath to the end, a small, silly flourish that made me smile because Sarah would have liked it. On the front left, they had set aside seats for family with simple printed cards. Brooks family, neat and impersonal. That's how churches have to do it. Grief comes in so many costumes, best to label what you can. I sat, and the pew creaked like an old friend sharing my weight. People filed in, neighbors from up the hill, a crew from the clinic, the neighbor boy who used to mow our lawn and always broke the first string on his guitar. He hugged me like he was afraid I would crumble, and maybe I would have if he hadn't. Grief makes you grateful for the oddest scaffolding. On the aisle, we kept a seat empty with a small program folded on the cushion, the way you might hold a place for someone running late. The program had Sarah's photo, hair tucked back, a few rebellious strands escaping, eyes wondering what dumb joke I had just told. That empty seat was for Emily, our only daughter, 32 and rusty with ambition. She called the night before and said, "I'll be there, Dad. I'm sorting something with Ryan's schedule, but I'll be there." She put a smile in her voice, the kind you use when you're hoping the other person won't notice you're crossing your fingers. I believed her. A father is a small empire of beliefs he keeps renewing, even when the roads in and out are closed. At 11, the organist doubled back over the hymn we chose to open, an old favorite Sarah liked because everyone could sing it, even the folks who normally hummed and pretended. At 5 past, the ushers looked at me the way men look when they want to help, but the only tool in reach is a glance. 10 past, the drizzle turned into a steadier rain and umbrellas bloomed in the windows. The empty seat stayed empty, like a question mark we were all too polite to read aloud. Reverend Lewis cleared his throat. He has a voice like a good cedar, warm, dependable, a little rough at the edges from years of weather. He read from Psalms, the part about walking through the valley that isn't a metaphor until it is. I kept my eyes on my hands. They are carpenter's hands, nicked and loyal. There is a comfort in hands that have worked for a living. They know where to go when your mind wanders. I counted the lines in my palm and tried not to count the minutes since 11. Somewhere during the second hymn, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I felt it the way you feel a small fish test a line, faintly guilty. I should have turned it off. I didn't, because widowers forget the obvious things and remember the useless ones. I ignored it. Then it buzzed again. 2 taps in a row, the way it behaves when someone sends a photo or a video. I told myself 100 reasons to ignore it and picked it up anyway, because truth, when it's on its way, will knock until your ribs answer. It was a message in the family thread from my niece Claire, who's 20 and believes feelings should be time-stamped. Uncle Jack, you okay? And then not to the group, a private forward with a gray bubble above a little square of color. Did you see this? I shouldn't have touched it. I touched it. The video opened to a smiling slice of cake, sparklers spitting celebratory fire. People shouted, "Happy birthday, Ryan." The camera swung past Emily's face, and she was laughing, throwing confetti at a man who leaned into his own importance. He kissed her cheek while someone off-camera whooped. In the background, I could hear a song thumping out a beat that had no business near grief. The caption was a cheerful blaze of hashtags. 34 looks good, birthday king booked and busy. The timestamp, 11:12 a.m. I felt something in my chest fold up neatly and set itself on a high shelf where I couldn't reach it without a ladder. I put the phone back in my pocket. In the front of the sanctuary, the organist finished the hymn with that triumphant last chord Church's favor. It felt like a joke played on the wrong person. When I stood to speak, I thought of words Sarah would have liked, plain ones, not the kind that make your mouth tired. I said she was a woman who knew where the band-aids were and how to listen long enough for a confession to find its ending. I said her laugh started in her eyes and became a whole room event. I said she kept a list taped inside the cupboard of people to whom she owed soup. I did not say my daughter was missing. I did not say we were throwing a party for a man I was still not sure deserved my daughter's best hours. I did not say that love is not measured in miles you drive for someone, or checks you write, or even in how brave you can be when the last breath is not the one you planned. Love is measured in attendance. Show up. Stay. Sit in the front row if you can bear it, in the back if you can't, but show up. After the service, the basement filled with the steam of coffee and the clink of church plates that have seen more potato salad than the sun has. People moved in well-practiced grief patterns, one person anchoring a conversation while another replenished napkins. I shook the hands of men who couldn't decide whether to use the shoulder squeeze. I hugged women who smelled like lemon cleaner and hope. "Where's Emily?" Someone asked in a voice that tried to be casual and tripped over concern. "Delayed," I said. "You know how city traffic gets. We do not live in a city, but grief abridges geography." Everyone nodded in a way that means we will not embarrass you with our accuracy. Mia tugged at my sleeve. She is 5 and, as my mother would say, pure sugar with a stripe of lightning. She glanced at the cake table with a professional interest, then back at me. "Grandpa," she said, "Mommy said we couldn't come because we had to get ready for a party, but I wanted to see Grandma's pictures." She said it like a confession, like she'd stolen a cookie. Ryan's cousin, a teenage girl with eyebrows so determined they looked like activism, looked startled, then busy with a stack of paper cups. "Grandma would like that you wanted to see her pictures," I said, promising myself there would be no more grown-up explanations for a child who still understood love like a coat you put on when it's cold. Mia pointed at the photo board by the punch bowl. "That's Grandma at the beach," she announced louder. "That's when she found the rock that looks like a heart." Sarah always found heart-shaped rocks. She kept them on the windowsill above the kitchen sink, so the light made even stone look merciful. "There's another one," Mia said, and dragged me to a picture from our first apartment. In it, Sarah is balancing a pizza box on one hand, a baby Emily on her hip, and a laugh big enough for 3 people. That's how she was. Generosity taught itself by imitation in her presence. After the casseroles and the way too strong coffee, the helpers packed everything into foil and pressed Tupperware into my hands. The church's way of saying, grief needs leftovers. I went home through the spitting rain, feeling like I'd walked into a house that had been rearranged by a polite thief. Everything was still there, but nothing exactly in the same place. The hydrangeas bowed under the weight of the afternoon. Inside, the kitchen clock ticked with new authority. I set the food on the counter, the containers like a small army awaiting orders. On the table, I put the leftover programs in a neat stack and laid one in the center, where I could pretend Sarah was just late to dinner. Then I took the jewelry box from the dresser and set it next to my plate. I sat. I poured myself a glass of water and didn't drink it. There are thresholds you cross without noticing, and then when you try to go back to fetch what you forgot, the door is gone. The phone buzzed again. This time it was a text from Emily. "Dad, everything okay? Service over." The words arrived light as dandelion seeds. I stared at them long enough for the 3 dots, her typing, to appear. "We tried to make it, but the caterer had a mix-up. You know how it is. I'll come by tonight, okay?" Then that cheerful bell at the end people add when they're throwing a blanket over a difficult truth. I wrote back, "We missed you," then deleted it because it sounded like an accusation, and I have never been good at that. I typed, "Service was beautiful. Your mom would have liked it." I almost wrote, "There was an empty seat for you." I didn't. I sent the watered-down version and watched the screen the way you watch a horizon that doesn't owe you a ship. For a long time, nothing. Then we'll make it up to you, promise. A heart emoji as if that were currency that spends in all stores. I put the phone face down and opened the jewelry box again. The envelope waited patient. Emily. The letters were looped but not fussy, exactly how Sarah signed birthday cards, "With all my love, Mom." I broke the seal, then closed it, then broke it again. No husband should be the gatekeeper of words a mother wrote to her daughter, but a widower is not a man who knows the perfect choice. He is a man walking barefoot through a room of Legos, trying not to swear. In the end, I didn't read it. I slid the envelope under the handkerchief, closed the box, and set it on the table as if Sarah and I were stuck at the same old argument. The kind where love is the only winner, and it doesn't mind losing. I wandered the house then, as if checking on rooms could change their temperature. In the hallway, the picture wall had our whole history: beach days, school plays, a photo where Emily is missing her front teeth and looks like a baseball card from the 1950s. I stopped at our wedding photo. We looked absurdly sure of ourselves. I put my thumb on Sarah's cheek in the picture like I could warm it. "You raised us," I told the woman I loved. "You raised even me." The doorbell rang just before 6, the way a doorbell rings when it's been told to be polite. I knew it wasn't Emily. There's a certain rhythm to your children's arrivals. They ring the bell like percussion. This was quieter. It was Mrs. Alvarez from next door, her arms full of stories disguised as food. Tamales, a pot of black beans, rice that could feed a softball team. "For later," she said, which is what people say when they mean for when it hits you again. "Gracias," I said, because Sarah taught me not to be a lazy guest in someone else's culture. She patted my arm and looked past me into the house, the way mothers do when they're counting souls. "Emily?" she asked gently. I shook my head. "Traffic," she offered, generous with excuses I had already used. "Traffic," I agreed. The word tasted like tin. After she left, the house took a deep breath and remembered it was empty. Evening is the great revealer. It arrived with that indifference only evening has. I washed a plate I didn't use and put it back in the cupboard because I could not stand the idea of dirty dishes and clean grief. Then I did what men do when they want to build something they can stand on. I went to the garage. The shop smelled like sawdust and patience. On the workbench lay a slab of cherry I'd been saving since the summer before last, when a storm knocked an old tree into the road. I planed the board while the radio mumbled baseball scores to a man who wasn't listening. The wood's grain revealed itself in slow river lines. I wiped my nose on the back of my hand and laughed at myself for being old enough not to care. I traced the outline of a chair back, the kind of solid kitchen chair that doesn't need to say anything to be faithful. Sarah liked chairs like that. "A good chair carries you," she'd say, easing herself down after a 12-hour shift. "It takes your day into its own back." She had a theology of furniture. I think that's why I kept building, so she'd always have somewhere to land. When the first piece fit into the second with that satisfying wooden click, I felt a small twinge of relief. Something still understood the rules. I didn't hear the car until it was gone again. A pair of headlights cut across the garage window and then vanished. A minute later my phone buzzed. "Dad, we're wiped. Long day. Can we do tomorrow?" No punctuation at the end this time. Even excuses get tired. "Okay," I typed. "Then love you." She didn't answer. Or maybe she did. And the answer was the silence you give when you've already spent your words elsewhere. I told myself a father's love doesn't keep a receipt. That's true, but even uncounted things weigh something. I shut off the radio, put the tools in their places, and flipped the shop lights until the room leaned into darkness. Back inside, the house greeted me like a museum after hours, everything in its proper place, no visitors expected. I made a plate I wasn't hungry for and took 2 bites out of respect for the cooks of grief. Then I got up and turned on the lamp by Sarah's reading chair because you don't want the night to win entirely. The phone, persistent little drum, buzzed one more time. This one from Ryan. "Hey Jack, big day, sorry about missing everything. We'll swing by this week to talk about some plans. Happy birthday to me, lol." I read it twice, not because the words were complicated, but because something in me couldn't reconcile lol with funeral. I put the phone down with the face up, as if that were braver. I don't know how long I sat like that, long enough for the ice in my water glass to give up and resign itself to being ordinary water again. Finally, I stood, went back to the dresser, and lifted the jewelry box one more time. I like to think I heard Sarah's voice, not in words, but in that particular hush a marriage learns to keep. I brought the box to the kitchen and set it in the middle of the table. The envelope waited. "I'm not ready," I told it, "but I'm here." I took a pen from the drawer and on the back of a receipt, some small purchase I couldn't remember making, I wrote a list. My hands like order when my heart is a riot. At the top, things to do tomorrow. 1. Call Reverend Lewis. 2. Write thank you notes, start with Mrs. Alvarez. Casserole ladies. 3. Take hydrangea cuttings, Sarah's trick, sharp angle, rooting hormone patience. 4. Open the letter for Emily when I am the kind of gentle Sarah trusted me to be. 5. Finish chair back. I slid the list under the jewelry box like a tiny foundation under a heavy house. It was nearly midnight when the rain gave up and left the roof in peace. I walked to the front door, locked it out of habit, and stared at the porch chair where Sarah liked to sit and watch our small world make its rounds. In the pale light, the chair looked like someone who had fallen asleep waiting for a story to end well. I clicked off the lamp and let the dark come. Grief is a teacher who whispers. If you turn up the volume of your life too loud, you miss the lesson. I went to bed wearing the shirt that still smelled like the church basement and the lilies. I had the ridiculous instinct to leave the envelope on the nightstand, close enough to hear it breathe. I didn't. Instead, I set it on the kitchen table like a promise to tomorrow. When I finally fell asleep, it was the thin sleep of a man who knows morning will not be a solution but an opportunity, in the smallest sense, to be faithful to what remains. The hydrangeas would drink the night's rain and lift their heads. The chair back would accept another careful pass of the plane. Reverend Lewis would call, and we would talk about the service as if it were a garden we had tended. And maybe, my daughter would arrive at my door with an apology that held the weight of attendance. Maybe she wouldn't. In the dream that found me, Sarah stood at the sink, the window open, the heart-shaped rocks warmed by an imaginary sun. She turned, not surprised to see me, and asked, "Did you save me a seat?" I reached for her, all the stupid, wonderful instincts of a married man who forgets death when love is near. "I did," I said. "I saved you too." She smiled the way light does when it forgives a room for being dark, and then she went back to washing dishes that did not need washing. I woke with the question like a soft bruise. What is a seat saved for someone who doesn't choose it? Another kind of emptiness, I suppose, when you dust around and keep anyway. Because love is attendance, and sometimes attendance is not who shows up, but who waits. The morning would come, and with it, the quiet inventory that befalls a house after a funeral, vases of condolence flowers that need trimming, leftover casseroles that need portioning, thank yous that need handwriting. And somewhere in that list, the second buzzing of a phone, the second video I would not watch, the second chance to lie to myself kindly. But between all that, a chair slowly becoming itself, a father waiting, a letter waiting, a promise carved into wood. We carry what we can, we forgive what we must, and we save a seat for grace, even if it sits empty a little longer than we hoped. The morning after the funeral, the house was swollen with flowers that had already begun to fade, lilies giving way to that sour edge, roses sagging as if the night had asked them to stay awake too long. I moved through the rooms like a man in borrowed shoes. Nothing fit, nothing belonged, yet here I was, tiptoeing around grief with my hands full of water pitchers. Sarah would have trimmed the stems, refreshed the vases. She knew how to give dying things one more day. I only knew how to watch them go. I was rinsing a plate when the phone rang. Not buzzed this time, not a polite notification I could ignore. It rang loud, jangling the quiet. I answered without looking because when you've buried your wife the day before, you answer every call as if it's a rope thrown to a drowning man. Dad, Emily's voice came, too bright, stretched thin like fabric pulled across a frame. I'm so sorry. Yesterday it was complicated. Complicated, that was her word, as if grief were a math problem with too many variables. I didn't say anything right away. I waited. Years of being a father had taught me the value of pauses. Sometimes silence is the only way to coax truth out of hiding. She rushed to fill it. The catering company messed up. Ryan's family was all here. We couldn't just cancel, you understand, don't you? I pictured the cake in that video, sparklers fizzing, her smile wide enough to erase absence. My hand tightened around the phone. The dish in the sink slipped and cracked against the porcelain, a sharp reminder that even small things break when you're not careful. You couldn't cancel, I repeated, tasting the words. They felt like a language I didn't speak. I mean, it was non-refundable, and Ryan's parents already drove in. It was just bad timing, Dad. You know I wanted to be there. I lit a candle at home for Mom. Doesn't that count for something? Her voice wavered then, as if she knew the currency of candles doesn't buy a seat at a funeral. I closed my eyes and leaned against the counter. The wood grain beneath my palm was warm from the morning sun, but I felt cold. You lit a candle, I said softly. Here we had an empty seat. There was a silence on the other end, the kind you can hear breathing through. Then came the defense, steady as footsteps on gravel. Dad, I have my own family now. Ryan needed me. Marriage means, well, you know what it means. Mom would have understood. That last part twisted like a nail. She used her mother's name as a shield, as if Sarah would have nodded from heaven at the idea that birthdays outweigh burials. I almost snapped. But grief had stolen my appetite for arguments. Instead, I spoke like a man laying a brick he knows no one else will notice. Your mother understood a lot of things, I said, but she never chose parties over people. Dad, Emily's tone shifted, softer now, almost pleading. Please don't make me feel worse. It was one day, one mistake. I'll come by this week, we'll talk, okay? I wanted to say it wasn't one day, it was the last day. The last chance to honor the woman who had given her everything from blood to bedtime stories, but my throat locked. When a father loves his child, he often spares them the sharpest truth, even if it cuts him instead. All right, I whispered. Come by. She exhaled as if a burden had been lifted. Thank you, I knew you'd understand, but I didn't understand. Not then. Maybe never. After we hung up, the house felt emptier than before. Silence has layers. There's the soft kind, like blankets, and then there's the hollow kind, like an abandoned well. That morning, silence was a well, and I was standing at the bottom, staring up at a circle of sky that didn't care if I climbed or not. I wandered into the living room and sat at the table where Sarah used to write Christmas cards. Her pen still sat in the drawer, capped neatly as if waiting for December to return. I pulled out a pad of yellow paper and began to write, not a letter, not even words, just a list. I've always been a list maker. Maybe it's a carpenter's instinct, measure twice, cut once, record everything. I wrote down the date, then under it, Sarah's funeral, empty seat for Emily, candle somewhere else. I stared at the list until the words blurred. Then I flipped to a clean page and began another, the one I called my ledger. Not of debts, though in a way it was. A quiet catalog of every sacrifice, every time Sarah and I had stepped in when Emily stumbled, tuition checks, first car repairs, rent when she and Ryan were short, hospital bills after Mia's birth. Not because we expected repayment, love doesn't work that way, but because sometimes you need to see your giving written in ink, proof you weren't imagining it. I added yesterday's absence at the bottom of the ledger, didn't come to say goodbye to her mother. My hand shook as I wrote it, not with anger but with the weight of recording a truth I wished were false. The phone buzzed again. This time it was a message, a photo. Emily had sent me a picture of Mia holding a balloon from the party, cheeks sticky with frosting. She had such a good time yesterday. She misses you, Dad. I stared at the little girl's face. My granddaughter, pure, unknowing joy. She wasn't to blame. She would never be to blame. Children aren't responsible for the priorities of their parents. But still, the photo felt like salt on a wound, proof of celebration where there should have been mourning. I set the phone down and walked to the bedroom. The jewelry box waited, silent, on the dresser. I opened it again, touched the envelope with Emily's name. My thumb traced the letters the way it once traced her baby curls when she was asleep in her crib. Sarah had written something for her. Words of a mother who must have known that one day the world would test her daughter's compass. I wanted to tear it open, to throw those words like water on a fire. But something in me said, not yet, not in anger. Words should be received with open hands, not clenched fists. So I closed the box and carried it downstairs, placing it in the center of the dining table. A silent witness. A reminder that some truths wait for their appointed hour. The rest of the day passed in fragments. Neighbors dropping off casseroles, phone calls from cousins, Reverend Lewis checking in with the gentle persistence of a man who knows grief often pretends to be fine. But through it all, I kept glancing at that box, at the envelope inside, as if it were a guest at my table refusing to introduce itself. And every time I looked, I remembered Emily's words. It was non-refundable. You understand, don't you? No, I thought, I don't. But I let the silence answer for me. The days that followed began to stack on each other like unmarked boxes in a garage. You know they're there, you know they're heavy, but you don't open them because you don't want to see what's inside. Mornings were the hardest. Sarah used to fill them with little sounds. The whistle of the kettle, the hum of the radio tuned to oldies, the scratch of her pen against the crossword. Now the house woke in silence, and silence is a cruel alarm clock. I took to sitting at the kitchen table with coffee I barely touched, staring at the jewelry box and the envelope inside, as if the paper itself might breathe. Emily didn't call much. A text now and then, short, polished words that felt more like receipts than conversations. Busy week, Dad, hope you're okay, or Ryan's project is stressful, send prayers. I replied the way widowers reply, with brevity so the phone wouldn't accuse me of saying too much. I'm fine, take care of Mia. What I didn't say, your mother's robe still hangs on the back of the bathroom door. The smell of her shampoo hasn't left. I can't bear to wash it away. What I didn't say, your absence at the funeral left a bruise deeper than any I can show. Instead, I worked with my hands. A man who has spent a life building things doesn't know how to stop. I went into the garage and began shaping that slab of cherry wood into a chair. It was supposed to be simple, but nothing about grief is simple. I sanded until my palms burned. I planed until the shavings curled like ribbons around my feet. Each piece I joined was a small negotiation with silence. If the wood fits, maybe my life can too. Sometimes when the plane sliced just right, I swore I could hear Sarah's voice behind me. Smooth edges, Jack. Nobody likes a chair that snags their sweater. I smiled without meaning to, then looked around at the emptiness that had spoken. Mia called once, her little voice bubbling through the phone. "Grandpa, Mommy said we couldn't come because we had errands," but I drew a picture of Grandma. She held it up to the camera, two stick figures holding hands, one with long hair, the other with a big smile. "That's her. She's in heaven, but she's still holding my hand." My throat closed. Children have a way of cutting through the fog without knowing they're wielding a knife. "That's beautiful, sweetheart," I managed. "Grandma would love it." When the call ended, I sat at the bench and wrote her name at the top of my ledger, Mia, not because she owed me anything, but because I wanted to remember the light. Amid the columns of money spent and sacrifices made, her name looked like a flower pressed between pages of old accounts. One evening, while putting tools away, I opened the bottom drawer of Sarah's desk. Inside was a manila folder labeled Will Drafts. I'd forgotten she had kept notes, working versions of what would become her final wishes. I thumbed through the papers, her handwriting steady, full of underlines and arrows. She had listed what she wanted done with her jewelry, with the photo albums, even with her recipe cards. And then tucked in the back, a page with just a few sentences. "If Emily ever loses sight of what matters, remind her. Remind her that love is measured by presence, not convenience. Give her a chance to find her way back. But if she refuses, make sure Mia knows the kind of woman her grandmother was." I folded the page back into the folder and sat in the dim light of the garage, the hum of the old freezer filling the silence. Sarah had known. She had written instructions for a storm she must have seen forming on the horizon. The weeks stretched on. People stopped calling as much. The casseroles dwindled. Life has a way of moving on around you even when you feel nailed to the same spot. I made lists to keep myself tethered. Finish chair. Replace shingles before winter. Write thank you notes. And beneath it all, the unwritten list. Figure out how to talk to Emily. Decide what to do with Sarah's words. One Sunday afternoon, I set the finished chair in the kitchen. It stood there, solid, quiet, waiting. I ran my hand over the smooth backrest. It wasn't just wood anymore. It was a seat for memory, for conversations that might still come, for forgiveness that hadn't yet arrived. That night the phone rang again. Emily. Her voice was careful, rehearsed. "Dad, Ryan and I want to come by soon. We need to talk about Mom's estate. There are some things we assumed would be sorted out by now." The word estate felt foreign in her mouth, like a child trying on shoes too big. I stared at the jewelry box on the table, the envelope inside, and the folder in the garage. "Come by," I said. And for the first time in weeks, my voice didn't shake. It carried something else, something like a decision forming, steady as the grain in cherry wood. They came on a Thursday evening, headlights washing the porch before I even heard the car door slam. I had been sitting at the kitchen table with a mug of coffee that had long gone cold, the jewelry box in front of me like a guest I hadn't invited but couldn't send away. When I heard the knock, I didn't move right away. I let it echo once, then again. Grief teaches you patience even with interruptions. When I opened the door, Emily stood there with her arms crossed, jacket zipped all the way to her chin, though the night wasn't that cold. Ryan stood half a step behind, a little smirk tugging at his mouth, the kind of expression a man wears when he thinks he's about to negotiate from strength. Behind them, Mia clutched a stuffed rabbit by the ear, blinking up at me with that innocence I couldn't ever hold against her. "Dad," Emily said, her voice clipped, "we need to talk." I stepped aside and let them in. The house still smelled faintly of Sarah's lavender sachets, tucked in drawers she had filled with order. I wondered if Emily noticed, or if she was too busy rehearsing whatever words she'd come to say. Ryan brushed past me as though the house were already his eyes sweeping the kitchen, pausing a little too long on the jewelry box. We sat at the table. Emily straightened her back like a schoolgirl about to make a presentation. Ryan draped an arm around the back of her chair, performing ownership. Mia climbed into the seat next to me and set her rabbit on the table. Its worn ear flopped over the stack of thank you notes I still hadn't finished writing. Emily cleared her throat. "Dad, we've been thinking about Mom's estate." There it was. The word again, estate. Not Mom's things, not her wishes, but the cold syllables of inheritance sharpened by Ryan's presence. She went on, words tumbling now as if rehearsed in the car. "Ryan and I have been looking at houses. There's one we really want to put an offer on. And with Mom gone, well, I just assumed there would be something set aside for me, for us, for our future. I think it's fair." Ryan leaned in then, tapping his finger on the table like a judge punctuating a ruling. "Jack, I mean, you've had your life. You and Sarah built everything. It's time to pass it on. That's how families move forward, right?" I watched his hand, the way it drummed against wood Sarah had polished 1,000 times. A man can tell a lot from how another man touches a table. Ryan's touch wasn't reverent, it was acquisitive. Mia, oblivious, traced a finger along the rim of my coffee mug. "Grandpa, are you sad?" she whispered. I smiled at her, the kind of smile that aches. "Not when you're here, sweetheart." Emily shifted, uncomfortable. "Dad, don't make this harder than it needs to be. We're not trying to be insensitive, but Mom would have wanted me taken care of, you know that." Her words dropped like pebbles in a well, each one echoing longer than it deserved. I thought of Sarah's draft notes in the garage, her careful instructions about reminding Emily of what mattered. I thought of the envelope in the jewelry box, her handwriting spelling out our daughter's name with the kind of love that had no idea it might one day be tested by a birthday party and a funeral. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I stood and walked to the counter. The jewelry box sat there, plain wood, unremarkable to anyone who didn't know its contents. I lifted it and set it in the center of the table between us. Ryan's smirk faltered, just a flicker, but enough for me to see he understood this wasn't a casual box of trinkets. "This," I said, resting my hand on it, "is where your mother kept the things she considered precious. Letters, notes, memories." I let the silence stretch long enough for Emily to shift in her seat. "Before we talk about money or houses, we talk about her." Ryan leaned back with a huff, but Emily's eyes stayed fixed on the box. For the first time that night, I saw something crack in her. Whether it was guilt, fear, or longing, I couldn't yet tell. Mia, still perched beside me, reached out and patted the box gently with her rabbit's paw. "Grandma's secrets," she whispered and giggled, but to me it didn't sound like a joke. I folded my hands, carpenter's hands with calluses that had built cribs and cabinets and hospital ramps for Sarah when her knees started to ache, hands that had carried her coffin. "Tomorrow," I said quietly, "we'll meet with someone who can help sort this the right way, your mother's lawyer. Until then, we'll remember her the way she asked to be remembered, with honesty." Emily opened her mouth, maybe to argue, maybe to plead, but then she closed it. Ryan muttered something under his breath about formalities and wasting time. I ignored him. That night, after they left, I sat again at the kitchen table, the jewelry box in front of me, Mia's rabbit still resting beside it. I thought of the ledger, of the receipts of love I had written in careful lines. And I knew the time was coming when silence would no longer be enough. That soon I would have to open the box, open the envelope, and let Sarah's words speak where mine fell short. Morning light filled the kitchen like a slow confession. It crept across the table, touched the jewelry box, and lingered on the wood grain as though even the sun had questions. I hadn't slept much. The echo of Emily's words, fair, taken care of, our future, played against the silence like a skipping record. I poured coffee, though I didn't drink it. Old habits persist, even when they've lost their purpose. Sarah used to say the smell of coffee was more important than the taste, that it woke a house, gave it a heartbeat. This morning the smell rose up but didn't reach me. I carried the ledger to the table and opened it, the pages soft from years of use. The entries were neat, a carpenter's handwriting, square, deliberate, each line anchored to the next. Tuition payments, loan cosigns, medical bills. Every time Emily stumbled, there it was, my quiet record of catching her before she hit the ground. I hadn't shown it to anyone, it wasn't meant to be shown. But sometimes love needs evidence, even if only for the one who gave it. When Emily and Ryan arrived, the house tightened. You can feel it when people bring in tension. It clings to the walls, unsettles the air. Mia trailed behind them, clutching her rabbit, her little shoes squeaking against the floor. She hopped into the chair next to me, as if claiming her place before the grown-ups could rearrange it. I set the ledger on the table beside the jewelry box. Ryan raised an eyebrow. "What's this, an account book?" "It's a record," I said simply. Emily frowned. "Dad, we don't need to go through all that, we just need—" "Sit," I interrupted, my voice calm but firm. "Listen." I flipped the pages one by one, reading aloud entries that stretched back years. Fall semester 2009, tuition $12,400, covered. I turned the page. 2012, first apartment deposit, $1,200, covered. 2015, car accident deductible, $500, covered. Page after page, sacrifice after sacrifice. Emily's face shifted as the list grew longer. Guilt flickered, then defensiveness, then something that looked like shame. Ryan leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, muttering about how every parent helps their kid. I closed the book with a quiet thud. "I never asked for repayment. Your mother never asked either. Love doesn't keep score, but love does remember." I slid the ledger across the table until it rested in front of Emily. Her fingers brushed the cover, hesitant, as though it might burn. Then I reached for the jewelry box and lifted out the envelope with her name on it. The handwriting was Sarah's, steady, graceful, the kind of script nurses used when clarity could mean life or death. "This," I said, my voice catching, "was written by your mother for you. I haven't read it, it's yours." Emily took it with trembling hands. She stared at the seal, thumb hovering as if afraid to break it. Ryan sighed impatiently. "Can we move this along? We're supposed to meet the realtor at 2. I turned my gaze on him, steady, unblinking. "Your mother-in-law's last words to her daughter are not an obstacle to your schedule. You'll wait." For once he shut his mouth. Emily opened the envelope slowly. The paper inside rustled like dry leaves. She read in silence at first, then aloud in a whisper, her voice breaking as she went. "My Emily, if you're reading this, it means I've gone where I can't remind you in person. So let these words remind you instead. Love is presence. Show up for the people who raised you, who held you, who prayed for you. Don't let convenience decide your compass. You are better than that. If you forget, find your way back. And if you can't, then look at your daughter and remember what kind of woman you want her to see." The words hung in the air like incense. Emily pressed the paper to her chest, eyes wet, lips trembling. For a moment she was my little girl again, the one who used to run into Sarah's arms after school, clutching a crayon drawing. But Ryan shifted, breaking the spell. "That's touching, really. But it doesn't change the fact that there's money, an estate. We need clarity on what's coming to us." Emily wiped her eyes, torn between her husband's insistence and her mother's voice still echoing on the page. She looked at me, and I saw the battle raging inside her, self-interest wrestling with conscience. I placed my hand on the ledger. "Tomorrow," I said, "we'll see the lawyer. She holds your mother's final instructions. Until then, you think about what you just read, and decide which voice you want guiding you, your husband's or your mother's." The room went still. Mia slid her rabbit across the table and tucked it against her mother's arm as if offering comfort Sarah herself could not. Emily broke then. She buried her face in her hands, shoulders shaking. Ryan scoffed, muttered something about drama, but no one listened. I sat in the silence, the ledger before us, the letter between us, and felt Sarah's presence fill the room, not in body but in truth. She had spoken, and the weight of her words was heavier than any inheritance Ryan could imagine. Tomorrow the lawyer would speak. Tonight the receipts of love were enough. The next morning carried a heaviness that coffee couldn't lift. I dressed in the same gray suit I had worn to Sarah's funeral, the fabric already softer from sorrow, and drove downtown to the law office of Dana Kim. She'd been Sarah's choice, not mine. Sarah trusted women who spoke with calm authority, who wrote their words in ink and meant them. She doesn't blink when it matters. Sarah once told me after a meeting, "That's who you want holding your words when you're gone." Emily and Ryan arrived just before 10, Emily with her hair pulled into a tight bun, Ryan in a sport coat too loud for a lawyer's office, navy with thin white stripes that seemed to argue with the walls. He shook Dana's hand as if sealing a deal while Emily avoided my eyes. Mia sat in the waiting room with a coloring book, watched over by the receptionist. I saw her glance at me before we went in, her small hand lifting in a wave. It grounded me. For all the noise of lawyers and ledgers, that little girl's wave reminded me why I was here, to protect what Sarah loved most. Dana's office smelled of paper and lemon polish. Shelves lined with binders stood like silent witnesses. She motioned for us to sit. "Jack," she began, her voice even. "I know this isn't easy, but Sarah prepared carefully. She left instructions that require us to review together." She opened a file. My name sat on the first page, written in Sarah's handwriting. Executor. I had known, but seeing it there in ink made my chest ache. Sarah had trusted me to carry her last word, and trust is a weight you don't shrug off. Dana looked at Emily. "Your mother left specific guidance. Jack is the executor with full discretion. That means he doesn't just carry out the will mechanically. He has authority to make decisions based on your mother's intentions." Ryan leaned forward, his tone sharp. "So where does that leave Emily? She's her daughter. Surely she's entitled." Dana held up a hand, unshaken. "Entitlement is a legal word. What Sarah left is clarity." She pulled out a second document, handwritten notes, pages covered in Sarah's neat cursive. She was explicit about her priorities: family, education, service to community. She read aloud a passage. "I want our legacy to reflect the values Jack and I lived. Support for education, especially for children who need help. Support for our granddaughter Mia so she grows up knowing her grandparents believed in her future. If Emily honors those values, she'll find her place within them. If she forgets, then let the choices we make remind her." Emily pressed her lips together. Her fingers fidgeted in her lap. Ryan scoffed. "So what, we get nothing after all those years?" I finally spoke. "After all those years, Ryan, your wife got more than most children dream of, and what she chose to do with it, that's between her and her conscience." Dana slid another sheet forward. "There are two main paths, Jack. 1. Divide the estate directly to Emily now, unrestricted. 2. Place it into a scholarship fund and a 529 education plan for Mia, with additional provisions for community service. Sarah left the choice with you, trusting you to measure hearts as well as needs." The room felt smaller then. The sound of traffic outside was muffled, like the world had pressed its ear to the window. Emily's eyes darted to me, desperate, pleading. Ryan's jaw set, calculating. I closed my hands together on the table. They were rough, marked with years of work. "Sarah always believed presence mattered more than promises," I said. "When she was alive, Emily, you were her pride, but she asked me if the day came when you chose convenience over family to guide you back. I can't ignore that, not when I buried her alone while you threw confetti at a birthday cake." Emily flinched. Ryan muttered something about ancient grudges, but I didn't look at him. I kept my eyes on my daughter, the girl Sarah had carried, the woman Sarah had warned might lose her way. Dana folded her hands. "Jack, the choice is yours. We'll finalize it at your direction." Silence stretched long, thick as wet concrete. I thought of Sarah's letter, of her draft note in the garage, of the ledger that bore every sacrifice. And I thought of Mia, coloring in the waiting room, a child who didn't yet know that her future was being argued over in a room of tired adults. At last I nodded. "I know what Sarah wanted, and I know what I have to do." Emily's eyes filled with tears, whether of guilt or fear I couldn't yet tell. Ryan leaned back, a bitter laugh escaping him. Dana only nodded. "Then we'll prepare the documents." And with that, the decision that had been hovering like a shadow finally stepped into the light. Sarah's voice would carry forward, not through promises of fairness or demands of entitlement, but through a legacy she'd built with her life and entrusted to me to protect. The dedication was held in the community center where Sarah had volunteered every Tuesday night for 20 years. The building was plain brick, a little weary at the corners, but inside the walls were alive with the smell of soup, the clatter of dishes, the hum of voices that had found warmth here when the world had offered them cold. It was Sarah's idea, long ago, to open the kitchen doors wider. "People don't just need food, Jack," she had said. "They need a place where someone looks them in the eye and remembers their name." I remembered those words as I stood near the podium, the air thick with the weight of her absence. Neighbors filled the folding chairs, the same faces that had carried casseroles into my kitchen after the funeral. Reverend Lewis sat in the front row, hands folded on his lap like a man cradling a prayer. And in the second row, Emily sat stiff, Ryan beside her with that same practiced smirk, his phone peeking from his pocket as though he couldn't wait to escape. Mia was the only one who looked truly present. She clutched her stuffed rabbit in one arm and a drawing in the other, a crayon heart with the words for Grandma written crooked across the page. She waved at me when I caught her eye, and in that wave I felt Sarah's presence more strongly than anywhere else in the room. Dana Kim stood to my right, the folder of documents open on the lectern. She nodded for me to begin. I stepped forward, cleared my throat, and let the room settle. "Friends," I began, "thank you for coming. Today isn't about endings. It's about what Sarah started and how we choose to carry it forward." I spoke of her work, the hospital shifts, the soup kitchen nights, the countless hours tending not just wounds but dignity. I spoke of her laughter that could disarm sorrow, of her belief that generosity wasn't charity but kinship. The room listened with that stillness only grief commands. Then I placed both hands on the podium and let my eyes rest on Emily. Sarah left behind more than possessions. She left her values, and she asked me as executor to honor them. So today I'm announcing the creation of the Sarah Brooks Scholarship Fund, a trust dedicated to nursing students from this community and to Mia's future education. A murmur rippled through the crowd, warm and approving. Reverend Lewis nodded, his lips moving in a silent amen, but Ryan shifted, sitting straighter, his smirk cracking. "Wait," he muttered, loud enough for those near him to hear. "A scholarship, that's what about Emily? What about her share?" The words hung sharp in the air. Emily looked down at her lap, her knuckles white. I held his gaze. Sarah gave me discretion. She believed that inheritance is not a transaction. It is a torch, and a torch is not passed to those who refuse to carry its light. I opened the ledger I had brought with me and laid it flat on the podium. I have records, years of sacrifices Sarah and I made quietly for Emily's sake. Tuition, rent, emergencies, love written in ink. We never asked for repayment. But when the time came to stand for her mother, Emily chose absence. Emily flinched, tears brimming. Ryan's face hardened. I lifted Sarah's letter then, the one Emily had already read. "Your mother's words remind us that love is measured by presence. And so, this fund will ensure her presence continues, through the young people it supports, through Mia, who will grow knowing her grandmother's name means opportunity and kindness." The room broke into soft applause, not raucous but steady, like rain on a roof, affirming. Ryan stood abruptly. "This is theft," he hissed. "You can't just give away what's ours." Dana rose calmly, her lawyer's voice firm. "Actually, Mr. Cole, he can. Sarah entrusted him fully, and he has chosen in accordance with her written intent." Ryan sputtered, then fell silent under the weight of eyes turning his way. Emily covered her face with her hands, shoulders shaking. I stepped down from the podium and knelt beside Mia. She looked up at me with wide eyes. "Grandpa, does this mean Grandma can help other people even now?" I touched her hair, soft as Sarah's had been when we first met. "Yes, sweetheart, that's exactly what it means." She grinned, proud, and held up her crayon drawing. "Then we should put this with it so everyone knows it's from her heart." I took the paper with both hands as solemnly as I would have accepted a crown, and for a moment the weight of grief lifted, replaced by something sturdier, legacy. The scholarship had been announced, the decision made public. The torch was passed not to entitlement but to the future. And as the crowd filed forward to shake my hand, to hug Emily in her tears, to pat Mia's head, I felt Sarah's voice in the room, not in words but in the quiet justice she had always believed in. That night after the dedication, the house felt different. Not lighter. Grief never truly lightens, but steadier, as though the beams had been inspected and found strong enough to keep standing. The ledger still lay open on the kitchen table, but for the first time, I didn't feel compelled to add another line. I had shown what needed showing. I had spoken what Sarah had entrusted me to speak. The rest would be carried not in ink, but in the lives of those who walked out of that community center with hope tucked under their arm. I sat in the chair I'd built from the slab of cherry wood, the one I'd planed smooth in those lonely weeks. It was sturdy, dependable. Sarah would have approved. Across from me, the photo wall caught the glow of the lamp. Our wedding day, Emily with missing teeth, Sarah in her nurse's scrubs, tired but smiling. And now a new addition, Mia's crayon drawing pinned just above the light switch, her crooked heart proclaiming for Grandma. Emily came by later without Ryan. She stood in the doorway, her face pale, her hands twisting together the way they did when she was a child caught in a lie. "Dad," she whispered, "I'm sorry." I didn't ask what she meant. Sorry for the funeral, sorry for the party, sorry for the demand, it didn't matter. All of it was folded into those two words. She crossed the room and sat across from me. "Mom's letter, it's still in my purse. I keep reading it. I don't know how I lost my way like that." I reached across the table, laid my hand over hers. Her skin was warm, trembling. "We all lose our way, Emily. The point isn't whether you got lost. The point is whether you find your way back." Tears slid down her cheeks. "Will you let me try?" I squeezed her hand. "That's all I've ever wanted." We sat there a long while in silence, father and daughter, the ghosts of anger receding, the fragile beginnings of trust stirring between us. Upstairs, I could hear Mia's laughter echoing faintly from the guest room where she played with her rabbit. That sound was proof enough. Love could outlast even our worst mistakes. Later, after they left, I walked outside. The hydrangeas were fading into their winter colors, muted but still standing. I thought of Sarah's words about them. The blues will come back, they just rest in another color for a while. Grief, I realized, was much the same. I sat in the porch chair she used to favor, the night cool against my skin, and whispered into the darkness, "We did it, Sarah. Your torch is safe. Mia will carry it." The stars answered with their quiet flicker, and I let the silence settle around me like a blessing. Sparkle's dear friends, thank you for listening to this story on Family Shadows. If it touched you, please remember to subscribe and share it with someone who might need its lesson today. From my heart to yours, I wish you health, peace, and a family full of love and respect. May your days be gentle and your nights be warm. Until next time.